This is a video to show you how I made my little cauliflower plushie. The base of the cauliflower is a sphere that I created using 3 segments sewn together. First thing that I did was to draw around all of my template pieces on the white fleece material using a water-soluble fabric marker. My template pieces did not include a seam allowance, so I've left a small gap between each piece to allow for seams. Once all the pieces were drawn onto the fleece, I cut them all out. I like to do all these at once as I don't like going backwards and forwards between stitching and cutting. Unfortunately, my scissors are not the sharpest, and I used them for wrapping paper over Christmas, and so I think I'm going to have to invest in a dedicated pair of fabric scissors to stop this from happening in the future. If anyone has any recommendations for good fabric scissors, I would love to hear them. Once the pieces are cut out, I took 2 of the spheres pieces and placed them back to back. I didn't bother pinning, as I find that working with fleece it's quite forgiving, and especially as this is a base piece that isn't really going to be seen very much. I do make sure to stay on the seam each side, so as you can see I flip the pieces backwards and forwards to keep the seams aligned. I do take extra care at the top and the bottom to make sure that the points are lining up as well. This seam is running along one side of the pieces from the bottom point to the top point. Once I reach the top, I piece in the 3rd segment and I again line up the top points together and start working my way down one side of the 2 pieces. So I will have 3 of the shapes, one after the other next to each other, all sewn together. As I reach the point of the pieces, I do take extra care as we now have 3 pieces joining together in one point, so I do place a few stitches between each of the panels at the point to hold them all evenly together. Once the 3rd segment has been sewn in, I start at the point and work my way down, sewing together the 2 seams that are not currently sewn together to create the sphere. I don't sew all the way down, I just sew 3/4 of the way down to give me a turning space and stuffing space. This sphere is going to create the base of the cauliflower, although a lot of it won't be seen. It's mainly structural, as the cauliflower florets that we are going to create will then be sewn on top of this. The front of it will be seen, however, which is why I chose to use 3 segments, so we have 1 smooth segment for a big face area. When I get to the end, I do tie it off extra carefully, as this will be under a little bit of strain as we're going to use this gap for stuffing and for turning the sphere. Once the stitching is completed on the sphere, I turn the piece inside out, well, the right way round, taking care to push my thumb along all the seams to make sure that there aren't any pieces that will be indented when it is stuffed, and it will be stuffed firmly. I then take a small amount of stuffing and begin filling the sphere. I found that once I'd pushed it into place and manipulated it a little bit, I did need to add an extra little bit on top, and that gave me a really nice firm sphere. I like to roll the shape around just to make sure that the stuffing is evenly distributed and just to make sure that it's the shape that I like. If I was not happy with the shape, I would pull the stuffing out and reverse the sphere and restitch one of the seams to create a better shape. Next thing I did is I just used 3 pins to roughly mark out where I was going to be stitching the face. This just helps me visualise when I'm sewing on the little cauliflower florets where the face is going to be. I will be embroidering the face using yarn a bit later on. Next thing to do is to start creating the cauliflower florets. For this one I made 4 of the big florets and 8 of the smaller ones, as it's good to have a mixture of sizes. The first thing to do is to take one of your spheres and loosely tack stitch around the perimeter or the circumference of the circle. It doesn't matter how neat this is, as none of this stitching is going to be seen. It is literally just to create a drawstring effect, as you'll see shortly. You really don't have to take particular care to adhere to the lines particularly well, as having a slight variation in shapes is actually better for the toy, in my opinion. I then took a small amount of stuffing and condensed it down into a little ball, and then I placed this inside the floret before pulling it tightly to close it. I could just tie this off here, but I do like to make particularly sure that everything is super secure, so I just run an extra couple of stitches through the middle of the cinched pieces just to hold everything together a bit more when I sew it onto the main sphere. I like to flatten my little florets a little bit more, as once they're stitched on they'll be condensed down further, so it gives me a good idea of the shape of the piece. Once the floret is sewn, I attach it to the main part of the body by doing a ladder stitch between the edge of the where it is attaching to the body, and I do go slightly further up on the floret just because it pulls it down a little bit tighter and it will make it stick up slightly less and be a bit firmer. I stitch all the way around the edge of the floret to make sure that it is completely attached firmly to the body and there is no space between the two that might start becoming undone. This process is going to be repeated for all of the florets until the entire head is covered. I randomly place these florets as I think it gives it a really nice natural look, using a different mixture of sizes and also having a slightly more organic look by manipulating the individual florets in slightly different ways each time. I also like to try and place the florets over the seams, as I think this gives it a much nicer finish, so I like to cover as much of the seams as possible with a good chunk of the florets. Once the piece is firmly attached, I run the thread back through the body and back out through the opening at the bottom of the circle. I tie it off on the edge of the fleece on a part that is going to be tucked under and eventually sewn into the body. I just quickly pinned the florets into place to give you an idea of the sort of the random placement of some of the pieces, but they will look a little bit different once they are sewn into place. As I do sew them a little way up, they do flatten out and take up more space than as you saw with the pinned demonstration. As the pieces are sewn into place, it will get a little bit tougher to sew between the pieces, but it's really important to get them as close together as possible to give it a really natural look. Sometimes you may find that you're not happy with the space between two of the pieces, but actually you can pull it down a little further and a little bit further across by stitching a little higher up on the floret and further forward on the body of the cauliflower. I don't know why I was going to call it a broccoli, it's a cauliflower, obviously. I don't have a real pattern for the placement of these floret pieces, but I think it's really good to have a mixture between the large and the small. I wouldn't place all the big together, I would space them out around the piece and then intersperse the smaller pieces. Once the florets are sewn into place, I used my water-soluble fabric marker just to mark out the eyes and the mouth before stitching. I decided to embroider the face using double knit black yarn, as I really like the finish on the plushie. I have still left the opening on the base of the body, and I use this to stitch the eyes and the mouth into place. I just run the yarn through the body and anchor it inside, and then I work my way down from the top of one eye down to the bottom of the other, and then carefully slide the needle over to the left to the base of the second eye, and then I can go up to the top of the second eye. Once I have sewn both of the eyes, I then work down from the top of the second eye to the right hand side centre of the mouth. I do 3 stitches across the mouth. I do one flat line in the middle, and then I do a raised line either side to create a small smile. One of the downsides to using yarn to sew the face, although it gives a nice thick finish, is it's quite hard to sew neatly using the big darning needle and not creating big holes. So you have to be really sure where you're placing the needle before pulling it all the way through, as the hole would probably be visible if you then had to take it out and stitch it in another place. Once I've finished sewing the mouth, I then run the yarn back through the body and back out through the hole at the back, and then I fix it off inside the back of the hole to keep it secure and stop the face from coming unravelled. Once the face has been sewn, the last thing to do is to sew up the base of the cauliflower, and I do that in the same way as I sewed the previous parts, by sewing slightly in from the edge and pushing the raw edge inside, and then stitching across to another part, gradually reducing the size of the opening until there is no opening. Although I do like to get it completely closed off, this is not totally essential, as the leaves, once they are sewn into place, will cover this space, so you won't actually see any gaps. To create the leaves, I created 4 leaves, and each leaf needs 2 of the templates. I created 2 using the standard template, and then another 2 leaves with extending the base by about the same again as the template has got at the bottom. This allows 2 to be sewn together and then 2 to be attached to the sides to create a more even finish. Once I have drawn round the template, I cut them out. Now I actually want a lot flatter seam on these, because they're leaves, they're quite flat, so I find the seams can be quite bulky, and you do have to take a bit more care to remove any excess fabric on the seams. Now, as I did with the body of the cauliflower, I start at the bottom right corner and make sure that these are both lined up, and I have got the finished faces together and the raw faces facing outward, and I am stitching the 2 shapes together. I'm going to go all the way around the leaf, but leave open the bottom opening of the leaf to allow for turning. The raw edges will then be sewn together to be hidden once they are attached together and to the base of the cauliflower. So I finished sewing around the seam. I just took my scissors and cut away some of the excess fluff and fabric, as this really can affect how flat the seams lay, and as it's a leaf we want it as thin as possible, so this really does help it just lay a bit flatter. You want to take care that you don't cut too close to the seam, as there may be a little bit of fraying and you don't want the fabric to fray past where you have sewn, so do take a little bit of care whilst going as close as is sensibly possible. Once the trimming is finished, I just turn the leaf the correct way around, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to embroider some details onto the leaf to give it shape, and it also creates a bit of structure to stop the leaf from becoming misshapen. I used yellow double knit yarn to sew embroider the detail onto the leaf, and I created the details by sewing large stitches up through the middle on both sides, holding the two pieces together. So I just run 4 stitches up through both sides. We'll fill in the gaps when we come back down again, but we are also going to do some shoots off to either side at the base of some of these stitches, as you'll see in a second. So once you get to the top, you need to work your way back down again. I do take care to line it up on both sides, and then at the base of each stitch I stitch once to the left and then go back down and the back, and then back up to the other side and then back down to the centre on the back, and that creates the stitch on both sides of the leaf. Then I create the next stitch down in the space so that the leaf vein is on both sides, and again I do an extra leaf either side of this, and then I do the same thing for the next stitch down as well. So we have 4 stitches in total running up the middle of the leaf, and we have 3 sets of little V-shaped stitches to create the little side veins on the leaf. I really like the effect of using this yarn on the leaf, but it also does give it a really nice structure and stops the leaf from being misshapen. Once I have sewn all of the side veins on the leaf, I should be back at the base of the main vein, and I just create that last stitch on the wrong side of the leaf, and I'm back at the base. On that last stitch I do go through both sides, and that holds the base of the leaf together, and then I just do a tiny little stitch to bring the yarn into the centre of the leaf, and then I can tie it off out of sight inside the leaf to secure it. Make the leaves posable, I used pipe cleaners. I bent the end of the pipe cleaner down to make it a little bit more sturdy to work with, almost like a bit of a flimsy needle, and I used the end to thread it up through the edge of the leaf, round and back down again. The pipe cleaner is thin enough that it can easily be bent around that end, but you do have to take a bit of care as it is quite flimsy, so doubling it over at the end does help, as does obviously pushing up the end there, as you see, to make sure that the pipe cleaner is all the way around the perimeter of the leaf. The embroidery does a really good job of holding the pipe cleaner in its place, as well as looking really nice, and once I've finished threading the pipe cleaner in place, I just bend the ends into itself and just tuck it in at the base of the leaf. On the other end I do double that over as well to stop it being sharp, and tuck that in as well to hide it before it's sewn to the other leaves. As you can see, once it's in place, the leaf is pretty posable, so you can give it a nice placement in different ways. Once the leaves are all sewn, I take the two with the longer points at the end and I attach them to each other with the raw sides together to hide the edges. So I just run some stitches along from seam to seam, just on the touching sides of each leaf. Once I've sewn along the first side and I am at the second edge, I turn the piece and begin sewing the other side together, tucking in any raw edges. As you can see, the two leaves will be opposing each other and the other two leaves will be attached at the base either side to create the 4 leaves. As you attach the 2 leaves together, you just want to make sure that you are tucking those raw edges inside, and as you can see, I'm just doing like a ladder stitch between the 2 pieces, slightly in from the edges and pulling it tight, and this hides any of the unfinished edges and makes it look really neat and secure. As I said earlier, once the first 2 leaves are sewn together, I then attach one of the shorter leaves to the centre of the 2 leaves at the side, and I do the same thing again. I just give it a little stitch to anchor it into place, and then I create a little ladder stitch all the way around the raw edge to attach it to the 2 leaves. Once the 3rd leaf is securely attached, I then repeat the process with the 4th leaf on the other side. As you can see, when there is a raw edge, I'm making sure that I do keep tucking it in, as I said before, just to make sure that there isn't any unfinished edges poking out. Once all the leaves are sewn into place, it should look something like this, and it's ready for the little cauliflower head to be sewn into the base. As you can see, all the leaves are quite posable, so they can be lifted up and shaped as to your preference. I just checked that I was happy with where the cauliflower is going to sit and that all the leaves are joining at the top, and they look like they are, so I'm ready to sew my little cauliflower head into the leaves. I kept the thread from the final leaf as I still had quite a bit left on it, and I'm just running that back up through to the other side of the leaves, and I'm going to then create like a ladder stitch as I did previously, all the way around the base of the cauliflower, a little way up, just so the leaves are hugging around the bottom of the cauliflower head slightly, and slightly up on the leaves. So it just creates that little base and it's not completely open. That's just personal preference for me, as I think that's how it looks cutest, but if you'd like it to fully open, you can just stitch it around the very base. And that's the little cauliflower finished. Thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel and keep up to date with future videos.